What is going on, guys? Skullrider here. Welcome to the first episode of my 2024 album listening challenge. Now, if you're watching and aren't sure what this challenge actually is, I recommend you go and check out my previously uploaded video titled A Very Important Channel Announcement, and I will go into much greater detail about the rules there. But for those of you who just want this really quick and brief summary, this challenge has me listening to an album a day from a list off Rate Your Music of the most highly rated albums on the site. Each week I will be ranking and discussing the albums that I listened to from the previous week. But alright, with all that aside, let's get right into the content. Though one more quick little update regarding this new avatar of mine that I'll be using to record these videos. I know his quality is not the best right now. I mean, it's just a series of 2 images. But if this series starts seeing a lot of success in the future, I will certainly consider making like a 3D VTuber model. Something a bit more interactive. So yeah, if you guys end up enjoying this series or other content on this channel, be sure to hit the like button and show me some support. And then I will certainly consider investing in making a better avatar than this. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's actually move into the video. Alright, for album number 366, we have James Brown's Love, Power, Peace, which was a live performance at Olympia, Paris in 1971. So to start off, I will say that this is a record that I have not heard before. And because this is a live album, I can't really rank this the same way I could a studio album. Like, the listeners are experiencing this in the moment they are at the concert and hearing James Brown perform. But despite all that, I still really enjoyed the flow and structure of this album. There was a really good balance between these super hype and energetic tracks versus more soft and toned down tracks. Also, it kind of sounded like some of these songs were almost mashups of songs that James Brown previously had recorded on other albums. I don't know that though, because I'm not super familiar with James Brown's music, but that is definitely something I want to do digging into because I really enjoyed this album. I can totally hear how like every funk rock band got influence from songs in this album. Like Primus and Red Hot Chili Peppers literally stole some bass lines from this man. And again, kind of how like I mentioned earlier, despite being a live album, there were some really cool transitions on here. I also really enjoyed the big band kind of sound the brass was able to make. I'm not really the biggest fan of big band, but it worked so well with all of these other funk instrumentals and James Brown's voice. Like, despite the funk association with this record, there were so many jazz elements. Like, there were a lot of moments in the songs where instruments would constantly switch and take turns with improvised solos. And on top of all of this, you have James Brown's voice. Like, this man has got a heck of a voice, insane vocal range, and something about it just moves your soul. I mean, I really don't know how anyone could listen to this and not feel this sort of uplifting sensation. But yeah, overall, this was just a super fun album to listen to. I really enjoyed every second of it. Honestly, the only issue I could see anyone having with this is that sometimes the instrumentals could be a bit repetitive, but like the melodies are just so good and catchy, I don't really think that's a problem. I'm gonna rank this album as a high A tier, easily. Alright, at number 365, we are continuing the spice, continuing the heat, with a John Coltrane record. So this is yet another album I have not heard before, but I have listened to a bit of Coltrane, so I was definitely excited upon seeing this record. But this album was definitely like none of his other records that I'd heard before. But before I say anything, this album started off with bass? Bass? Okay. I felt like this album combined the elements of bebop and cool jazz that I enjoy the most. And really, I don't know how Coltrane is able to combine it and find this sound in the middle, but it just sounds so good and it works so well. Like, this man truly is one of the jazz greats. Somehow there was both the in-your-face element of bebop, but the chillness of cool jazz, and I don't know, somehow the album just combined them really well. Like, there were definitely some moments on this album where I felt like I just wanted to get a nice warm blanket and cozy up by the fire. And this was a really emotional album. Like, emotions were all over the place here. Even just the opening track, Olé managed to capture joyfulness, sadness, and even a sense of paranoia. But yeah, like Coltrane's other albums, this album is just a musical work of art. I don't think I can quite put it at S tier, but it's gotta go high A tier up there with the James Brown album. Alright, so next up comes the first album on here that I've actually listened to before, and it happens to be by one of my favorite bands ever, Pink Floyd. Their first and certainly not last album to appear on this list is The Wall. So yeah, because this is the first album I've listened to before on this list, I can definitely say a lot more about it. Overall, I do think that this album is a masterpiece. The Wall is actually a concept album, which means that it tells this progressive story throughout it. And this is where I'm very glad I listened to this album before getting into this challenge, because I would be so confused just listening to this album without any of the background, especially when the second act rolls along, which I'll get into that later. So the actual story of this album is one of a very troubled rock star who throughout his life has many people who shapes who he is, but none of these people really have a great influence on this guy, so throughout all of these bad experiences, he just builds this wall of self-isolation. I feel like the beauty of this album is that you don't need to be this crazy celebrity to relate to it, because we all go through these bad experiences that we have with others. And all of us have the temptation to just want to walk away from it all and just isolate ourselves, which is exactly what Pink, who is the main character of this album, does. But in a very beautiful ending, Pink realizes that this wall has only hurt him. And in fact, he almost ends up becoming like the very people that caused him to build the wall in the first place. Even though the ending of this album is technically up for interpretation, I definitely like to believe it's a happier one where Pink does end up freeing himself from this self-isolation. And all for the sake of people in his life that do still care about him. Okay, but now let's get into ranking this album musically. Now, if this album was just a written story, like this would be an easy 10 out of 10. But since it's written in music media, we obviously have to take that into account as well. Unfortunately for me, music-wise, there are some lackluster moments. But don't get me wrong, there are some of the highest of highs on this album too. Like some of the best songs that Pink Floyd have ever made are on here. Comfortably Numb, Hey You, and even Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, these are just classic songs. But then you get some songs in the second act like Bring the Boys Back Home, The Trial, Vera, and they're just like, what? Like yes, they are purposeful and make sense in the overarching narrative, but musically they're just so out of left field that they don't really jive with the rest of the album for me. I don't know. Like if this album was just Act 1, it would be high A, maybe S tier, but unfortunately for me, the second act kind of drives it down to a high B, which is unfortunate because yeah, there is a lot of really great stuff on this album. Oh hey, what do you know? Another album that I've heard before. So I'm not as familiar with this one as I am with The Wall. Listening to it again was kind of a new experience in a few ways. But man, one thing that stuck with me was that this album was just as, if not more crazy than the first time that I heard it. But there were definitely a lot of more chilled out and mellow moments too that I really don't remember from the first time I listened to it. So because of that, I'd say that this album was extremely well balanced energy-wise. Probably the biggest takeaway I got from this album was that I never knew how epic of a combo violin and electric guitar could be until I heard this. Like, this album is really a roller coaster with so many fun twists and turns. Like, there were so many songs where I just had no idea where the music was going. Like, some transitions and build up from slow to this chaotic, upbeat sound were just masterful, man. Like, this album legit has some of the most technical stuff I've ever heard in music. Like, the amount of complexity that's showcased here is just unbelievable. And like, some of the electronic sounds that these guys are able to make and mesh with the music is just crazy that it even works. And the guitar solos. The guitar solos on this album have got to be some of the craziest you will ever hear. Even though this is mainly a jazz album, there's really a whole spew of genres in here. From rock to classical and even to blues in The Dance of Maya. But alright, time for the ranking, which I mean, this is undisputably A tier or above. You know, I think just for the craftsmanship that this album is able to produce, S tier. Alright, so on to album number 362, The Ghosts of Great Highway. This was probably the most surprising album on this list for me for several reasons. So, Rate Your Own Music labeled this as a folk album, which they're definitely not wrong. I mean, if you could choose one genre for this thing, it would definitely be folk. But I really was not expecting to hear all this electric guitar and even like solid drums in moments in this album. But just looking at the folk aspect of this was really solid. Like, the Lumineers are kind of my extent of the folk music that I've listened to, but just hearing one album from this artist has already put them right up there with them. So when I first heard this guy's voice, I was a little bit worried. I wasn't sure if I liked it, but it did grow on me surprisingly quickly, like definitely by the second track. But my favorite part of this album, being as big of a rock fan as I am, was definitely the guitar. It had this super hypnotizing and melodic feel to it, and it really got me into this crazy introspective and reflective mindset, which again, I was not expecting from this album. Because some of the instrumentals actually got pretty heavy for some songs, but surprisingly, it still somehow really worked. And it kind of overall had this kind of darkened, overcast feel to it, which I really enjoyed. I don't really know what this says about me, but I've always been more attracted to these darker albums, so. But there were still more upbeat songs that had less of a melancholic feel that I was really jiving with. Honestly, this album's an easy A tier for me. This is really hard, but just out of personal preference, I think I need to put it slightly below these funk and jazz albums. So yeah, we'll put it right there. Alright, next we got Black Sabbath Volume 4 by Black Sabbath. This is another album that I have not heard before, and Black Sabbath isn't actually a band I'm super familiar with either. Like, I've pretty much just heard all of their hit songs. I haven't even listened to Paranoid, which I'm sure is on here, so I'll listen to it eventually. But, man, it's albums like this that remind me why I love rock music so much. This is just a super solid hard rock, I guess technically metal album. Like, the guitar in here, some of those parts are just so epic, so hype, just makes me want to jam out. But what definitely surprised me was the slower, more ballad-like song of Changes, which I actually liked a lot. And another surprising thing about this record was that it had this very bluesy rock sound to it as well, which I was not expecting. Like, you can totally hear the inspiration that bands like the Black Keys and Wolfmother got from this album. And there's definitely even some Rush inspiration in here too. But yeah, really solid album. There was nothing that like super amazed me, but I'll put it at A tier because there was nothing that I disliked on this album. I'll be right back. I'ma just go play my drums along to this real quick. Alright, so now we have reached the final album of this video. Sobrevivendo no Inferno. Sorry if I completely butchered that pronunciation. So even though the rap was in a language unfamiliar to me, I was still very much getting down to the flow of it. Like, if I'm being honest, I would take this stuff any day over 90% of the mainstream rap on the radio nowadays. However, the thing that this album does that really makes it stand out as a rap album to me are the different instrumentals that this record had to offer. The coolest thing that happened regarding the instrumentals in this album were how for some songs they could go for like this typical kind of Iggy rap instrumental to this just like completely fear-inducing instrumental straight from a slasher flick. Which makes me want to do more digging into the lyrics and content of the songs, as pretty much the only info I got on them right now are from Rate Your Music that's saying it's gang and drug related, which, yeah, given some of the occasional screaming and gunfire in the background of the songs, I imagine the lyrics could get into some pretty dark stuff. So, I don't know, maybe ignorance is bliss here. But as I kinda said before, the actual flow of the rap was really easy to get into. Like, definitely stuff to turn on if you just want to just sit back and chill. Now, probably my main and really only critique I have of this album was that it could have a tendency to drag on a little bit. Like, nothing wrong with longer tracks in general, of course, but there were definitely some moments where I was wondering when some songs were gonna end. Like, if the instrumentals and the rap wasn't so good, I really don't think I'd like this album. But yeah, I definitely did still find myself thinking, okay, when's the song going to end? So because of that, I think this album is really close to A tier, but it's not quite there. Give it a high B, but just under The Wall, only because I'm more familiar with that album. And because The Wall has those few really amazing tracks. Well, alright guys, that'll do it for this video. The first of many, of course, in this album ranking series. Well, assuming that I can keep up with the challenge. Which, with the help of you all, I certainly believe I will be able to. So yeah, I would really enjoy your guys' feedback. If you like this, let me know, hit that like button. And I will be back next week with some more musical content. Peace out.